Right, guys, before we get into the video about this Unhinged Guardian columnist, make sure you follow me on all other platforms like Gab and BitChute that will be linked down below, along with everything else. I will even put it in a pinned comment if I remember. The story we're actually covering today sort of talks about why you should do that, but you already know this already. You don't need me to tell you. And if I'm actually honest with you, I'm not even showing you this clip because of the censorious times we are living in. I am showing you it all because last night I see this Guardian columnist appear on the BBC suffering almost unrivaled levels of Trump derangement syndrome. And as far as I can tell, even calls all Trump supporters Nazis, but even more shockingly, actually claims Trump supporters are more violent than the BLM riots last year, that I'm sure most of you remember cost what, 30 or 40 lives and destroyed who knows how much of multiple cities in America. Obviously, she is completely off her rocker, living in a fantasy land, calling them mostly peaceful protests. But then again, so did the BBC when it happened over here. Naturally, the BBC will let her bullshit go unchecked and just changes the subject, because obviously it is the BBC. As we all know, they suffer the same Trump derangement syndrome, possibly even more. But you know what? Enough of me talking shit. Let's take a listen to what they actually say, and you guys can let me know what you think in the comments.
Jonathan, you've written extensively about the threat from domestic terrorism. It looks like the FBI think that some of people on the fringes of politics, some of those people had kind of attached themselves to this cause of a stolen election, and that it's unleashed some forces that the kind of system is finding it hard to contain. How big a threat potentially do some of these armed individuals and groups pose?
Well, look, what's interesting to me is all this discussion of violence, who incites it, who carries it out, and who should censor what to avoid it. And I am very concerned about the big technology companies, Apple, Google, Amazon Web Services, and Twitter. And they've all acted to censor President Trump and to remove or shut down their competitor service, Parler, because they say they won't accept the promotion of violence. But, you know, Twitter, for example, has long hosted violent hashtags, kill Trump, assassinate Trump. Only a few weeks ago, Twitter published Iran's so-called supreme leader's threat to Israel, saying the fake Zionist regime will perish. And in, I think, 2018, he described Israel on Twitter as a malignant, cancerous tumor that has to be removed and eradicated. They didn't block him. So they're apparently fine with overt and specific threats of violence like that. And I'll say, however much some people dislike Donald Trump, it's worth remembering that when censorious and illegitimate actions are taken to counter bad people, it sets a precedent for them to be taken against good people. And we don't need to agree on who's good and bad to accept that that's really a worrying precedent for technology companies run by extremely wealthy people who are unelected, unchallengeable by ordinary citizens, to make those decisions about what type of legally expressed news and opinions we can read. It's dangerous and wrong. Now, I don't like how Donald Trump's reacted to losing the election. And the violence we've seen in the US is deeply worrying, as you say, coming from those fringes and potential domestic terrorist fringes. But I don't just mean the storming of the Capitol building. I mean the months of violence and rioting that America's suffered recently. And watching all of it unfold over so many months in a country I have enormous amounts of respect and love for is really unsettling. I think it's vital that any of us who condemn politically motivated violence carried out by people that we disagree with should also condemn violence carried out by those whose politics we agree with. And if we only condemn one side, we're not truly ideologically opposed to violence. We're just political opportunists. And that's true on both sides, left and right. So I think increasingly both sides are guilty of this.
Polly.
Dangerous, both sides are guilty. One really has to be precise. When Donald Trump, when Charlottesville, when neo-Nazis killed somebody and Donald Trump said, oh, well, it's both sides. Very often the violence has been much greater and much more frightening from the Trump supporters, and who are neo-Nazis. They go back with Nazi slogans and swastikas and Confederate flags. That to simply say it's all equivalent with Black Lives Matter, mostly peaceful demonstrations, sometimes a bit of rioting, but nothing on the scale of intentional violence of the Nazis. I think that's actually dishonest. And we have to call out the right things. I completely agree about Iran. Iran should not be allowed to put out death threats to Israel on social media platforms. I completely agree we should have the same standards of threatening violence from wherever it comes in the world. But let's be a bit careful about one kind of demonstration and another.
Let me finally, Hugh, last word, if I may, and just briefly. The biggest challenge, as he's said this weekend, is COVID. How great a challenge, 100 million.
There is a pattern consistent throughout history of oppressed people turning on the oppressors, slaves against their owners, the peasantry against the feudal barons, colonies, Mr. Verhofstadt, against their empires. And that is why Britain is leaving. And it doesn't matter which language you use, we are going, and we are glad to be going. We're off.